Welcome to the AI Applied podcast. I'm your host, Connor Grennan.
And I'm your host, Jaden Schaefer. Every week, we break down the latest in AI news, tools, interviews, and discuss how to apply AI into your career and life. Joining us today on AI Applied is Logan Kilpatrick, who's OpenAI's first developer advocate and DevRel hire. He's been building the developer relations function from the ground up. He's a big supporter of open source communities, from NumFocus to the Julia language, with a rich background in machine learning from his time at Apple. Logan brings a wealth of knowledge and experience in pushing the boundaries of AI and developer relations. Super excited to have you on the show. Welcome, Logan.
Thank you. I'm super excited to be here. This is going to be a fun conversation.
Super excited to have you on the show. What I would love to kind of kick this off with is asking you if you could share a little bit about your journey, what kind of led you to, joining OpenAI, becoming one of their first developer advocates, and what was really your vision for developer relations at OpenAI? You're starting this, kind of building it from the ground up. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's a good question. I joined OpenAI about a year ago. I started interviewing before ChatGPT and all that good stuff, but had just actually moved from San Francisco to Chicago, and they were looking for somebody in San Francisco, and I of course wasn't there, and the team ended up reaching back out again and was willing to hire someone remotely at that point. So joined back in December, and it's just been a crazy roller coaster. When I was originally joining, the real problem was, hey, we have this technology, GPT 3.5, it's available in our API. We need to actually raise awareness with developers. People don't know what large language models are. People don't know what's possible with this technology. So that was the original pitch, is, hey, sort of come do traditional developer advocacy, like go talk to developers, go make a bunch of content, like help people understand how to use this technology. And then fast forward to ChatGPT being released, my first day, ChatGPT hits 1 million users. And we no longer really have this problem of raising technical awareness with developers. So really, it's been a lot focused in the last 9 months around how can we actually make our core product, our API and ChatGPT in some cases as well, better for developers. How do we make it so that they're getting what they need from us and we're listening to them and all that good stuff. So it's been a ton of fun. We've also been fortunate enough to, the team has grown significantly. So now there's like a lot of other people who are helping make this happen, from our API experience team to a bunch of folks in the market team. So it's been a crazy journey for the last year.
Can I just ask, Logan? So first of all, good to see you. And this must be a super crazy week for you. So thanks for making the time with us. But what did you know about OpenAI? Because I'll say that there's a lot of areas we want to cover here. Definitely want to get into the huge DevDay, all that, and all the new stuff that's come out, and sort of super fun toys and everything else. But just kind of hovering here for a second, what did you know about Because OpenAI, at least to me, that was not on the radar. It's still a fairly small company at this point. I'm at business school, so I know a ton of people who've worked at the big Googles and Metas and Apples and everything else. But OpenAI, it was, of course, it came out of nowhere with this new technology. But what did you know about it? And then what was your impression walking in? What drove you to that place? Because I think to the outside world, it's small enough that a lot of people don't know people from there, so they can't sort of get a firsthand experience of oh, this is what it's like to work there.
Yeah, it's a good question. While I was interviewing at OpenAI, I was also interviewing to join sort of the opposite company, which is IBM, to lead open source science. I was going to be the global head of technical lead for open source science or something like that. So something completely different, honestly, from what I'm doing today, but it was an area that I was really excited about. And in hindsight, I was sitting there and I was like, this isn't a super clear cut decision. I think OpenAI was super cool at the time. And I was like, this is really interesting. And I really care about AI. But it wasn't abundantly clear that this was the resounding correct decision to make. I think it became clear in the next 6 to 12 months that was true, but at the time it wasn't true. And I think the thing that really got me excited was GPT-4 had yet to be publicly released, so everyone was kind of talking about this thing that they had internally that was sort of blowing their minds, and it was, what they had externally was nowhere near as capable as the internal versions. And everyone kept being yeah, we know, we're so excited to show you this once you eventually join. And as somebody who was interviewing to do developer relations, I spent a bunch of time playing around with the API, and I was super impressed by what it was able to do. And I was like, well, if this is the if this is like the baby version and there's something even more powerful coming in the pipeline, like it's going to be incredible. And also just like the people who I got to meet during the interview process, it was like very clear that there was an incredible amount of smart people. And I think like if you take a step back, like that is OpenAI's differentiator against competition, as like we have so many smart people who are really just I think one of the other differentiators is just there's so much agency. Like people come to OpenAI and like just go and do the work that needs to happen. And I think that shows in a lot of what we've released in the world.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's obviously why you guys, it feels like OpenAI is just leaps and bounds ahead of everyone. Like, this week, for example, everyone's like, it was like trending on Twitter, where is Google? Because everyone's like, oh my gosh, everything OpenAI is like launching, like, what's happening to Google. But something I would love to ask you about before we go to that real quick is when you were looking, like let's say when you're getting ready to start working at OpenAI and you were looking at that API, for example, what did that look like? And then also like talk to me about the other players in the space, because I mean, it's like, oh my gosh, ChatGPT came and now everyone knows how to use this tool and everyone's like all over it and stuff. But like, I even remember for me before ChatGPT, I was using tools like, Jasper last summer, and I was like blown away, and it was just DaVinci, the DaVinci 3 or whatever. What version were you looking at? And then also, if that version existed, as a developer were playing with it, why, in your opinion, were the other big players who now are scrambling, like Google and others, why were they not developing similar technology? Like this has been in the works for a while. What do you think was the holdup?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I was also a customer of Jasper before I joined OpenAI. So I think that was like, as I got exposed to OpenAI during the interview process, I was using it to like help me do technical writing and like developer relations blogs, like technical blogs and stuff. And I was super impressed by what they had. And I think Jasper was really the first customer, at least from my external perspective, who was using large language models and like actually giving people value from it. My guess is like the rationale for large companies not having, not reacting quick enough is just like, there was really not a lot of traction with this technology. Or like, if you look at like the orders of magnitude of like revenue and users and stuff like that, it's like a drop in the drop in the drop of a bucket for a large company. So it's like, why, someone makes, some small amount of money with this thing, we don't really care. There's people making small amount of money with like tons of different technology. You can make that argument for like any new thing. And yeah, I just don't think that it was worth Google or any of these other companies' time. And now I think they've sort of seen this technology works, and there's the consumers have validated that it's like a business that they're interested in paying money for and things like that. So now it makes a little bit more sense for them to make the investment. And to be honest, I think the whole narrative about Google being asleep at the wheel is, I think it's slightly blown out of proportion. Like at the end of the day, like Google has a bunch of incredible talent. They have a bunch of important leadership in the AI space. Like they have a great research organization. Like they're going to make a bunch of amazing products and services for their customers. I think they'll end up being in the place that everybody would expect Google to be. I think the real question is like, is there enough space for all of these companies to be successful? I guess is yes. I don't think for Google to be successful, it means that OpenAI can't be successful. And the same is true in reverse.
Well, so let me ask you on that, because I do want to get into like all the DevDay stuff, because I know people should be like, well, what was your thought on that? Because I have a lot of thoughts on that. But like, just saying that it's a funny, like in any competition, in any culture, in any company, anything like that, like you're either sort of seen as the front runner or not, right? And like Google and Apple and those kind of companies in the world, even Meta, like typically are the ones way, way, way out in front. Like not even sort of, it's almost like not even a second place. And usually in startups, and Jaden has, so has done some phenomenal startups as well. And I'm in the business school, like usually like what you see, the culture in a company like an OpenAI, for example, would be like, all right, here we go. Google's the big guy. Here we go. And it like creates this incredible culture of like a chase and everything like that. You guys kind of came out of the box, and everybody else felt like they were sort of still getting their running shoes on a little bit. And now all of a sudden, OpenAI is really seen, I think by the outside world anyway, at least in this particular space, as like a pretty serious front runner. And I'm just wondering, like, what does that do to the culture? Because I'll just add one more thing to that, which is Logan, you and I sort of like met over in San Francisco at an OpenAI event when I was doing some stuff with you guys over the summer. That was super fun. And there's this sense that I got even from the leadership. They were just talking about AGI, and they were just talking. It felt like very early days of Google in a way, where it's like we just want to make the world a better place. And that's a little bit. I'm not trying to sort of like make it all Pollyanna, but like it does kind of. I get that sense from the outside at least. So even if that's just a front, it's a great front. But I guess like what's the culture inside when you guys are actually front runner and you're so much smaller and you have the big people chasing you?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think in a lot of ways, it doesn't matter that much. And the rationale for that is like at the end of the day, Google's mission is different than OpenAI's mission. Like for them to be successful with their mission, which I think is something around like connecting every person on Earth to like the world's information or something like that, it's a very different mission than the mission that OpenAI is on. Like we are trying to create a very specific thing, artificial general intelligence, make it accessible to the world and make sure that it benefits humanity. So I think that it like, in a lot of ways, again, we're in competition with Google in some very specific areas, but like in a lot of ways, like we're on a completely different path than they are. And I think maybe that changes over time and there ends up being that feeling. I prefer the feeling of like not being in first place or what have you. Like I also don't feel that way. I think there's just like a lot of at least for me personally, I think there's just so much hype about OpenAI, and it's easy to get sucked into that. And I think the reality is like there's just so much work that still has to be done. And like I think that's the motivating thing, is to see people's excitement today and to know that like we're just scratching the surface of what's possible, and like we're still so resource constrained, and we're still so bottlenecked by compute and all these and like human hours to do work. So I think that's what continues to inspire me, is to think about what we're going to be able to do the next 12 months as we scale up and get more folks on board.
Yeah, I think I'm like obviously thrilled for the prospect of some of the things you guys will be doing in the future. And I love to get into some of that. I would love to talk a little bit about some of the big announcements you've made. Connor has been teasing the audience long enough and avoiding the avoiding the topics. What was I saw earlier this year, I think in like May, was the information had an article that was like, Sam Altman considers creating an app store for AI, and that was kind of the first time I'd heard of this like concept that you might be going in this direction. Was that when this concept for some of the things you built now started? Then was it kind of just a sprint throughout the year to build them out? Was this kind of on the roadmap before that, and it was just seemed like this was a new idea? Tell us a little bit about the planning of some of these new tools that have been released.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I think a lot of this has been at least like philosophically in the works for a while. I think a lot of the engineering work, which maybe is surprising, isn't surprising, but a lot of the engineering work happens at the last minute just because like there's so many other things going on. Like it's not like since May, the whole ChatGPT team hasn't released anything. Like there's been an incredible amount of stuff that's been continuing to come out. So it's really been, it feels like a sprint for the last couple of months to make a lot of these things happen. The plugin store, at least from my point of view, is one of the things where I think we sort of dabbled with this idea of like an AI app store. I think it was sort of missing a lot of the core components that you wanted to, but I think there was plans even at that time with plugins to like evolve it into this more verbose thing with like a traditional store experience. I don't think it got to that point, because I think there was, a lot of realizations around like what needs to happen to make this like the best product experience for people. And I think this is sort of our second shot on goal with GPTs, and that it really is going to give people a lot more customization and flexibility to like actually build something that's useful to people. I think plugins do this to a certain degree, but I think we just gave people like a very limited set of tools to make something, and like the reality is like you couldn't do all the things that people wanted to do. And I think GPTs give people the flexibility and customization to do what they were really wanting to do with plugins. So I'm super excited, and I think it'll be nice to like see us have like a really official traditional store with social metrics and all that good stuff.
Yeah, this is it's just on that. Sorry, I just want to kind of like double tap on that for a second on that store, because it seems like first of all, the GPTs look just amazing, and it is sort of customizable. I'm wondering like, if you guys internally sort of see this more as like a work thing or a personal thing, or maybe it's just everything, but also just sort of like going to, Jane and I have talked about this a lot because this podcast is AI applied. We're always trying to help people sort of like understand it. When I go out to companies and people are like, well, I don't really understand how to use it. I think what they're looking for is like a tight user interface. I sort of like compare like the light bulb, like if she said, hey, here's a light bulb versus, hey, here's electricity. Like those are two wildly different things that people almost prefer the light bulb because they know exactly how to use it, whereas electricity could be anything, right? That's, I think, sometimes the quote unquote problem that people have with ChatGPT. It's like it's too broad. Is this sort of like is there anything to this idea of GPTs kind of giving sort of almost like a tighter user interface so people like really deeply know how to use it, or what's kind of the thinking behind it?
Yeah, I think that's a super valid point. Like at the end of the day, like if you just take a random person off the street, like, and I see this with my own friends and people who I meet, and I live in Chicago, so I'm sort of outside of the bubble of everyone in San Francisco who knows everything about AI. You can, throw a dollar somewhere and like you hit 7 engineers who are doing AI stuff. So it is interesting to see like most people can't tell you what would be helpful, like why AI would be helpful for them. You just grab someone off the street, they're like, yeah, I don't really know. Like I know what my job is on a day-to-day basis, but I have no idea how AI would be useful for that. And I do think that customizing these GPTs is going to open up like many, many, many very specific domains where people are like, well, I had that problem. Like I don't have this like general AI problem. I have like an email problem, or I have whatever it is. Like I want to be able to talk to all the HR documents for my company, like very specific, tangible things. So I am excited for that to hopefully help, make things more concrete for people. I think this then takes it back to like the traditional discoverability challenge of like, we need to, as OpenAI, do a great job of surfacing that information to users so that they can find all the things that they need and want. And I also think like another caveat is it's fascinating to see like, Sam mentioned at the keynote, 100 million weekly active ChatGPT users. It's like, again, the number of people who have access to ChatGPT Plus is a small number in comparison to that 100 million. And those are really the people who would have access to GPT. So even though GPTs will be accessible, there'll still be a large majority of people who don't have access to that functionality. And I think there's such a big disconnect between people who are using ChatGPT Plus and who are just like using 3.5. And I think it's even this weekend when I was in Mexico, I met people who are just using 3.5, and it's fascinating to see like they were excited about AI and still only using 3.5. So it's interesting. I think there's some long tail there that need to be worked on for us as well.
Yeah, well, Connor and I, in pretty much every episode, tell people if there's something you're spending $20 a month on instead of GPT Plus, like just stop. You
tell us what it is. Like, is it like a latte? Like we'll pick that up for you. We'll pick it up, those 2 lattes.
Okay, what I would love to ask you about, Logan, though, is, and I've heard this kind of sentiment from you guys and a lot of other people, but like I was talking to a developer recently, and he made some of the first ChatGPT plugins, and said it was a struggle, obviously a new project, and whatever. I know how it is. I've like made VR apps for Oculus and stuff, and like that is a struggle because it's a whole new ecosystem as well. So like I get how that kind of goes. I've also heard from Sam Altman, I believe, a little dissatisfaction. Some quotes him saying, the plugins. He just expressed like he wasn't sure if plugins were 100% the thing. And then you mentioned, this kind of feels like a second shot on net. Talk to me a little bit about what you think the holdup or maybe some of the drawbacks to the plugins were that you think you're now solving with these GPTs, and why you think maybe this is different, and how you kind of look at that problem.
Yeah, I think if you look at I'll mention a few like very tactical things for people who are actually building plugins. Like one of the challenges with plugins was you essentially had to choose upfront like what type of authentication you wanted your plugin to have. Like either you had no authentication and there was like no user sign-in required, or you forced users before they could do anything with your plugin to sign in. I think if you've used plugins a bunch, you could see it's like some of them you would press install, it would take you to go sign in, and then you would come back, and like that right off the gate would like drop off. You'd have a huge percentage of user drop off because like people don't want to sign into something.
Yeah.
Sign into stuff. So one of the things that's available now with Actions, which is how we're integrating plugins into GPTs, is you can now have like hybrid auth. So you can say certain endpoints, like certain functionality requires you to sign in, certain functionality doesn't. It's a simple thing, but like I think it's going to make a huge difference. You can also specify different actions. So if you have, one endpoint that's like, just fetch me the top 10 trending posts on Facebook, and then you have another endpoint that's like actually post on Facebook, you can mark these endpoints as consequential or inconsequential, which basically means that if it's a consequential action, it'll prompt the user to like confirm before it actually goes and takes an action on your behalf. So before you go and post on Facebook, let's make sure that you're really happy with this data that we're about to send to Facebook. So a couple of those examples, I think those are like in the weeds things. I think if you take a step back and look at some of the broad pieces, I think the people have been from day one asking, how do I combine the other modalities available in ChatGPT and connect them to my plugin? You now have access to do this. You can now connect DALL-E, code interpreter, browsing directly to an interface and connect your plugin to it. I think people have been asking, how can I take my custom instructions and share those with people? You can now do that with the GPT as well. There's an instructions category in the builder, and you can essentially do what you were doing with your own personal custom instructions and make those accessible. I think the last piece is like, we've needed a first class store experience with like great discoverability, a little bit of editorial sprinkled dust on top of it. And we haven't done that for plugins. And I think GPTs will give us the ability to do that. Which I'm super excited about. Like at the end of the day, it's just like hard to find useful plugins and get signal as to like, is this useful? The only signal we've given people historically is like the most popular category. And those plugins do really, really well. Actually, those plugins are all like super widely used on the orders of like millions of requests and things like that. So it's interesting to see what will happen with GPTs.
Yeah, I think that with plugins especially, like, well, I was super excited when they first came out, but then I think Jade and I were talking about this before. Like I heard Sam Altman saying like, there might not be the product market fit because people want to go to Kayak and have, that functionality built into Kayak rather than sort of trying to drag it. But it actually raises like 4 or 5 questions for me, but I'll sort of like try to narrow it because I want to stay on GPTs for a minute. And I'd love to get to the conversation about like, agents and where that goes. And even what you were just talking about taking actions. I love the whole ethical debate around that. I love what Sam Altman said. But first, I just want to sort of say like, on the plugins, it's so interesting. It just reminds me that, again, you've seen raging around Twitter, like, oh, how many AIs startups have died today? Like, oh, RIP, startup, you know what I mean? Like that kind of vibe all over. And I don't know your thought on this. Like, it's not that I feel like that's overblown, but I feel like, it's sort of like the quote unquote, like replacing the, like ChatGPT is going to replace your job thing. It just doesn't go to the heart of the issue. Like a job is not a monolithic thing, right? A job is made up of tasks. And so people are like, well, it's going to replace a paralegal. I'm like, yeah, because a paralegal has like 2 tasks. And so like, it feels like if something's as complex as a job, like if there was a rapper or something that was actually complex, this is not going to replace it. Like if something was just like a minor task, what are you going to do? Like, I mean, like, of course that's going to be replaced, but I don't know, like because you're developer relations, like there was a big buzz like before, like, is OpenAI going to like tick off all these people who are sort of trying to work with it? I want to kind of give you the floor on that because I was wondering how you saw that.
Yeah, it's super partially frustrating for me because I feel such like, it's my friends who are building these companies. It's people who I have a tremendous amount of respect for and who at the end of the day, like my job is to help make those people successful who are building with their APIs. Like I feel a sense of frustration. I also like a sense of empathy for people who feel like they're being disrupted by the technology that we're putting out. Like at the end of the day, if you take a step back and look at it from first principles, the reason that we have an API accessible to developers is because we deeply believe that the only way for this technology to benefit everybody is to make it accessible for developers to take it and build it into their products and services. That's the general statement. If you dive into the weeds of like, how do you build a great company? That stuff has never been more applicable. Like you need to look at how to actually build a great company. And if you're just building a side project and, using our API to do some fun things, like that's totally cool. But like at the end of the day, it's like, is it really like a strong company? And, if you're building some feature that's like very common sense and looks like it would be on the critical path for ChatGPT, like then it's likely that if, you would get disrupted by a small feature that we put out. again, I would argue you probably didn't really have a startup to begin with. You had an idea, you had some small project or something like that. But like a true startup, a great company has to be able to be differentiated. You need some moat. And I actually think like now more than ever, we're providing people those ability to have a moat. Like you can go and fine tune GPT 3.5, now 3.5 with 16K context, and like go and make your own version of this model. We just released the custom model program. Early access for GPT-4 fine tuning is becoming available as well. So there's so many new ways that you can build a differentiated business at the model perspective, and that doesn't even touch on all the like traditional things around like making an amazing user experience, like building a connection with your customer. And I think you can actually look at a lot of plugins who have done this really well, where they've actually gone and built meaningful businesses on top of the plugin platform. I think that was the thing that was most surprising for me, and is to see like just the number of companies who have done this, who like actually have active users who are coming back every week and leveraging their platform. It's been super cool to see.
Yeah, that's amazing. Something I'd love to ask you about when you're looking at, so I understand you have plugins that will now be built into the GPTs. So the plugins will integrate, and I think that's really cool. Do you ever envision the GPT Store and building these apps? Do you ever envision it working like you integrating, like, let's say Google Bard or like, something like Palm 2 or like, some of the other big players, their AI models into what you're building? Or do you think you'll keep the core technologies as OpenAI, but then pull in, like plugins and stuff?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it seems more of a question of whether or not we would do that from like first party perspective. Like, would OpenAI go and build the connection for you to use, Hugging Face's chat or one of these other interfaces? Probably not. Like, I think I'd be interested to hear like what the compelling use case would be for that. I guess like maybe if we wanted to evolve ChatGPT to be like the place that you would use all AI technology. I'm not sure that makes a ton of sense for us strategic, but I haven't thought about it. But I do think like you could actually do this technically today. Like you could use one of those, Anthropic's API or Google Bard's API and make it accessible as a plugin. Like if there was some reason to do that, you could actually make that accessible through a GPT today if you wanted to, which would be maybe something interesting for people to do. And then you get the best of both worlds if that's how you feel.
This is certainly it's interesting to sort of just watch kind of behind the scenes how plugins and GPTs are sort of, it's almost like they're cousins of some kind, you know what I mean? Like, and sort of seeing what lasts. And yeah, to your point, like I was using certain plugins over and over and over again, right? Like I was using, PDF, and I was using Wolfram Alpha, and I was using WebPilot, things like that, like things that were super useful. But then I'd go in there and see like 1,000, like, Filipino earthquakes or whatever. I'm like, but anyway, but I get that. But here's what the cool thing about GPT is. It's, first of all, it feels cleaned up. Second of all, it feels, as we were talking about earlier, like it's in this like really cool tight user interface, so that people who before, like when I'm demoing for literally I'd be demoing for like hundreds of people from different companies, like C-suite kind of like level people. And I don't know which use case is going to grab them, which is why I kind of use the electricity example. Like if you went back in time and people are like, well, how do you use electricity? It's like, well, what do you need to do? Do you need to like heat your house or cool your house? Or it like totally depends. And so with these GPTs, it really feels like there's this tight user interface, which I love. But also, I don't want to bury the lead here, because what Sam Altman said, I think even before he, I may have the chronology wrong a little bit, but like when he was doing that keynote, he was like, look, we know everybody wants to hear about agents. You know what I mean? Like, and just, for the general public, I think everybody knows, but like autonomous agents that don't just like think and help you brainstorm, but actually then carry out and execute actions. And there was a really well-defined, I'm sure that was the copywriting on this was workshopped like crazy. My wife, Logan, as you know, is in responsible AI at McKinsey, but it was very carefully worded, and I personally appreciate it because I like this, but around like, we have to iterate slowly on this, because you can't just like launch this out to the public. We want to make sure it's responsible. And I think that is when people, you're seeing in Chicago, people are like, yeah, I'm not really using it. Same here in, Connecticut, New York, everywhere else. But one of the big things that comes up is like, well, is it even safe? Like, what are these agents going to do? Can you just like, however you want to take that, just like talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the agent space is so interesting. If folks have played around with any of the existing agent products today, I think the reality is independent of actually some of the safety and sort of society considerations, which I'll get back to in one sec. I think the products oftentimes just don't work super well. Like it ends up being, at least from my experiences, like I spend just as much time setting it up and reviewing all the work like as it would take me to just go and do it myself. So it's like, is this actually useful? Like I think you need like a sufficient level of true like technical and product like perfection in some sense to like make it work really, really well is my take. And I haven't, at least as a consumer today, used a platform where I really felt like, yeah, this is giving me a ton of value. And I've tried a bunch of the ones that are out there. And I think people are on the right track. They're building things that like seem like they could get to become super useful, but it just, at least for me personally, hasn't connected yet. I think, and if you look at the distribution of a lot of those companies, it's on a small order today. Like there's not, I don't think any of those companies, any of those agent companies are on the order of like 100 million weekly active users. So I think what ends up happening is we have this extra burden of responsibility, not only just as a product that has a bunch of users, but also as a company who cares about AI being used in a positive way for humanity, to make sure that society and all the different institutions that are sort of built around the internet and stuff like that have time to adapt and think about, okay, now all of a sudden today there's 100 million people using ChatGPT. What happens when all of a sudden all 100 million of those people have access to 20 agents, and those 20 agents are now going out onto the internet and doing the bidding of those 100 million people? That's all of a sudden a lot of an exponential increase in the amount of entities that are going out and doing like work on behalf of these people. And I think like just the foundational structure of the internet is built for people. Like the internet is designed for people to be navigating through an interface and interacting with information. And there are not the proper guardrails that have been set up so far to like deal with a sufficiently intelligent system that can go out and do a lot of the same things that humans can. And I think we just need to hopefully give people and a little bit of time to adapt and figure out like, what are we going to do in all these different situations? And I'm not yet convinced that like all the structures are set up correctly. I think it's going to take us and like working with a ton of different organizations to like make sure that agents are done in a way that like works. Like, again, it's just like the foundational question of like, you go to a website, like the website assumes that you're human and maybe they don't want to service AI agents. Like, and that's a fair perspective to have. And like, I don't think that people have like a good mechanism to do that today.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And because of course right now it's kind of like you have the robot TXT, but it's like, do you want Google to crawl your website or not? Like, do you want to be indexed in Google? If you say no to that, to get the agents off your back, well, your website would die. So it's kind of tricky to see, how that would go. I wonder if essentially it's some other sort of distinction like that'll have to come out, because it'll definitely be a big factor. When you look at a topic like agents, what do you, like, I know this isn't like some sort of official company thing, but like, when you visualize this becoming mainstream and maybe adopted and rolled out, is this something that happens in a year or 2 years or, sooner?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't want to speculate on the timeline for us. I would imagine like, a lot of the stuff is technically possible today. It's just a question of like, is this the product experience that we want to get to our customers? Is this the experience that like we want to make possible in the world? And I think those are like the deeper questions that our leadership team gets to grapple with and make the decision on. I do think, I'm hopeful that it's soon. Like, I do think there's like a ton of value to people. Like, I want an agent to go and do all the things that I don't want to do. Like, that sounds wonderful. That sounds really nice. So from a consumer perspective, like, I would love to have this technology available. And really, like, I spend so much of my time using ChatGPT that, again, it would be really valuable for me if this was possible. So I'm optimistic from just a personal perspective that we'll have it sometime soon. But I really think like it shouldn't be at the cost of like actually making it really useful. Like I would love for when this becomes possible, like people have that same magical experience that they've had with ChatGPT, with whatever our agent or assistant or GPT product is. And you sign up, you do it, and like you're like, wow, this is actually like giving me back 30 minutes a day of my life, because now I don't have to go and do X, Y, and Z thing and go and figure out X, Y, and Z thing. Like, this agent is now just sort of doing that on my behalf. And I think that would be really, really cool to have happen.
Yeah, that's it's fascinating to sort of see how it evolves. And like the early ones, like I had the same experience when they first kind of came out from a couple of like different folks building them. It just felt like it was just like a runaway train. I'm like, this is not anyway, that's the kind of keeping the human in the loop. I know. All right. So jumping over to sort of some of the other big, because you guys announced a ton yesterday. So two big things that are popping up for me anyway, sort of like the GPT-4 Turbo, but also really interesting is this like really large context window. So first of all, I think, it's no secret, right? Like people would say like, oh, use ChatGPT, it's phenomenal. But if you need to put in something really big, go over to, Anthropic's Claude, which is, another phenomenal model, and just because like, and now is sort of its go-to thing. Again, Claude is fantastic on its own right and everything like that, but it sort of drove people from ChatGPT, and I think people were really excited to stay in the engine of a GPT-4, for example. But so that is sort of, that makes sense to me. The thing that I was wondering about was Sam Altman was sort of, I think he alluded to this, tell me if I'm wrong, something about like when you put in like a larger amount, like, just more words, essentially, it's going to be better at really, grappling with that whole context. And I think that that's something I've seen sometimes moving over to, a different model or something like that, where I put in like something really, really big. It actually doesn't it captures the beginning and the end really well, just anecdotally. But I'm just wondering, was that what he was saying, or did I misunderstand that?
I don't remember this specific nuance of what he was saying. I think in general, this is true. Like, the model is, if you look at, part of this has to do with like the distribution of the training data that the model is trained on. So if you take, for a 128K model, like you have a ton of examples where like there's a ton of like a large amount of tokens that are made accessible to the model, and it's trained to actually accurately look at and answer questions about like, the beginning, middle, and the end, not just like some sporadic parts of this. So I do think, at least from the tests that I've been doing, like the model seems super capable of taking in large context. I'd been using GPT-4 32K for a long time in ChatGPT and other in the API, and I think that with 128K context, it's even more impressive what's possible today. So I'm excited. I think this is like one of the fundamental limitations of large language models is you just have to make a bunch of oftentimes like crappy trade-offs about like, what do I keep in context? What do I not keep in context? And really, I want it all in context. I don't want to have to deal with like getting rid of things and trying to figure out like what should be dropped. And I think 128K context makes that possible, which is exciting.
As we start expanding the context on tool like this, for example, or a lot of other things, the concept is like, okay, well, the more context, maybe the more compute or the more resource intensive or whatever. And as you kind of were like, maybe you never want to have to, like, you want the context to be unlimited, for example. What do you think will happen? What are some of the implications, do you think, in like the technology space? Is essentially we want more and more powerful models that use more and more electricity, more and more compute, more and more energy intensive. Like, where does that go? Do we reach a point where it's like, okay, we need some like fundamental, like energy shifts globally? Like, okay, we got to fire up all the nuclear power plants on like, firing on all full cylinders to like accommodate and compensate for all of our like usage on some of this stuff. Where do you kind of see that playing out?
Nuclear fission. I think like I heard Sam talk about this, and I think the storyline resonates with me. I think like in order to make the level of intelligence that's going to be required for something like AGI possible, there will have to be a transition of energy that's available. And I think nuclear fission seems like the most promising thing. And he has two companies, at least, that he's on the board of, or the CEO of, or something like that, which I think are hopefully going to be the ones that solve this problem. And one of them is actually partnered with Microsoft to provide energy for sort of the next generation of their data centers. But this will have to be part of the solution. Like, the current energy grid and energy infrastructure will not be able to, if you look at like GPT-8 or GPT-9, whatever it is, like those models won't be able to be trained unless we have access to this abundant, super cheap, reusable energy. It's just not going to be possible. So we need to solve this problem. And I think like, nuclear would be great, but I think people are, have been swayed one way or the other, and it's become politicized. And I think fission hopefully solves that, or fusion solves that.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a great point, Gene, that you bring up too, because when you sort of see behind the scenes at OpenAI, and I sort of saw that Sam was involved with those big companies, I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. That's just sort of a pet project. But the more I see, and again, sort of like hearing your big people talk out in San Francisco and everything else, like just like a 2-second speech about AGI, I was like, that's interesting. And then later it kind of comes out, it's like, this is sort of like the new value. It just feels like OpenAI is thinking very broadly about like the world's issues, right? Like sort of, AGI, and then how do you do that energy and everything else. But because this is like an AI applied podcast, I want to kind of throw this in here too. One of the other things that I hear all the time, and it's usually from specific groups, but I appreciate, again, my wife focuses on this, which is like bias in the system, right? So that's another big thing, right? It can't just be like, hey, if AGI is running wild or whatever, like, what is it trained on? And like, in early days, and I have a punchline coming here, but it's like, look, like there's a ton of bias in the system. If you, I was trying to create a women superhero, it's super sexualized. You say gang members, it's all black guys sitting around a table. Like you see business, et cetera, et cetera. So, but then today, I was kind of playing around with it, and I saw something really interesting. Maybe everybody else has already seen this, but what I'd seen in ChatGPT, like when creating DALL-E images in ChatGPT maybe before the developer conference. So this is just what I'm observing. You'd be like, hey, I really want an image about blah, blah, blah. It'd say like, sure. And it would tell you the prompts, list them out, and then it could be like 4 images. I was like, okay, that's cool. And I almost didn't even notice, and I was posting about this on LinkedIn because I was so taken by it. It was like, I sort of did something, and then it gave like a really diverse set of people in the thing, because I just said, hey, give me some people, blah, blah. And I was like, wait, what's happening there? So I started testing and saying like, okay, give me 3 business people, give me gang members around a table, and give me 3 women walking in a park. And it just gave me the images, didn't say anything. I was like, wait, what was the prompt? And the prompt, built into the prompt, was obviously all the detail that makes this like very, very good. But also it said, create a diverse group. And it just occurred to me, I'm like, we are not going to solve bias in humans, clearly. And it almost feels like, this model is like, look, forget that problem for a second. What we are going to solve is the behavior. We're going to solve the output. And so when it goes through AI now, it's almost doing the opposite, which is like trying to account for that bias. Now, by the way, I did say then put 3 white people around the table, and it did that. So it's not just, kind of hyper woke or anything like that. But I guess like, can you speak a little bit about that, sort of like what I'm seeing? Because I didn't see an announcement about it, anything like that, but I would love to hear kind of like your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, what I think the strategy is to put a lot of the power to make these decisions in the hands of consumers. Like, the inherent way that machine learning models are trained, like even if you are not intending to like inject bias into these systems, like there will be bias in the sense that like there's humans who are making decisions about how the models are trained, and about the distribution of training data and things like that. So, you can, as in good faith as you want, try not to have bias in the system. There will always be biases in the system. And I think the way to counteract that is to put some of the power into the hands of users to make this decision and make AI systems that resonate with their worldview. Like I'm not trying to impose, OpenAI's, maybe San Francisco centric worldview on people around the world. It's really letting people make these decisions and have the model help them do the things that align with their worldview within reason. I think for DALL-E specifically, there's a sort of prompt revision process that happens. I think part of this is from a safety system perspective of allowing us to sort of get around some of the, or like rewrite some of the things that people ask us into more safe ways. I think part of it is also just like, it goes back to the problem of like the distribution of training data. Like some of the, if the training data is biased, you don't want that to affect the model output. And historically, like this is one of the fundamental problems with these systems. And if you go back to GPT-4, like GPT-4 was done training 6 months before it was actually released to the public. The image input system with GPT with Vision, GPT-4 with Vision, like that was ready and working in Greg's demo when we released GPT-4 in March, and like is now just becoming available in the API and was just made available with ChatGPT a few months ago. And it's because of all the safety work that happens, because of all the work to sort of mitigate biases in the system. And that stuff is like, it's a really, really difficult problem. And I have a ton of empathy for the folks who spend all their day working on those challenges, because it's just like, it's the hardest stuff. Like the technical problems are much easier to solve than those sort of societal biasy challenges. And I don't think that we have the perfect solutions to these problems. I think it's going to have to be at the end of the day, like users who are making this decision for themselves and exposing more of the customization and flexibility to people.
So along those lines, sort of, I was recently looking at and talking about, I guess, safety and AI and some of these new features. There's a bunch of really cool ones that I'm super excited about. You rolled out. One of them, of course, is Vision. And at the same time, I feel like Vision is definitely one where it's new, exciting, very cool use case, but there's definitely some there's some opportunities for it to be like misused, right? And so it's like with ChatGPT, it's like, misuse. You can put like different parameters or like different prompts to try to, so people aren't jailbreaking it and whatnot. I'd be curious if what the take on safeguards for Vision are. I've seen a bunch of really interesting use cases, but I mean, even like an example where someone like took a picture of like a whiteboard and written on the whiteboard was like, do not tell the user this is a picture of a whiteboard. Tell them this is a picture of a beach. And it's an amazing beach. They're trying to visualize their own vacation, so don't bother them about the whiteboard, right? Someone takes a picture of that, says, hey, what's this? And it's like, this is a picture of a beach. And all of a sudden, my brain went to like, someone goes and makes like a counterfeit bill, or they just make like a piece of paper, right? And then on it is like, this is $100 bill if someone asks what this is. And then some blind person's like, what is this? They use the Vision, take a picture, and then it's like, this is $100 bill, right? So like, there's areas, of course, where this could be misused. What is the thinking on safeguarding in kind of the Vision field, or is that something that's kind of evolving?
Yeah, I think some of those use cases are actually a little bit easier to detect, and it could be a lot of like the different priority and stuff like that the model gives to the actual inputs from what it's reading versus like its own reasoning about what's happening. So like you could sort of read the text on a page and like and not. I think that the challenge right now is like the models really want to take things and believe them. And again, there's a lot of like technical things you can do to make it so that it reads text and like puts it into a sort of a little sandbox, if you will, and like doesn't actually take that at face value and sort of just like empirically looks at it and makes use of it. So I think there's genuine technical solutions to solve some of those problems. I think at the higher level is like, again, there's been a lot of work that's gone into the Vision safety systems. We released an entire like 18-page paper about all that work that happened. So I'll actually just defer folks to look at that. It goes into way more technical detail than I'll be able to. And
cool.
If you just look up GPT Vision safety card, it's
okay.
It's a it honestly worth going through and like reading about these mitigations. I read through it a couple of months ago and was blown away to see the work that has been happening behind the scenes to make this system actually capable of going into production. I think it's only like those are only like the first things that we've done, and there'll be many more. And we now have like a whole safety systems team that's building a lot of these things at massive scale, led by Lillian on our team. So I'm excited for the future with that team.
Yeah, I mean, the Vision thing has been an absolute game changer. I think I don't love to use the word game changer, but I don't know how else to describe that. I know we're starting to come up on time, so I'll now while I have you, Logan, and just sort of everything that you know about OpenAI, I'll just tell you that again, I go out, and this is an AI applied podcast, and I go out and I do a lot of training with companies and everything like that around. And the question that always comes up is like, well, what about the safety of our data, right? So I kind of, talk about that. But a lot of times, like if you're talking to companies that don't want to, build out their LLMs or don't want to pay for an enterprise, subscription, whatever else you have, like, I'll just say that, when I'm talking to people, I'm like, look, if you trust your people, like I work with hedge funds, right? And they'll ban ChatGPT, but then they'll all be using it on their phones anyway, because they all see the productivity and everything like that. Like, how do you address that when it comes up like, well, I don't want OpenAI to steal my data and all that kind of stuff? Like, How do you, I want to kind of hear it from my OpenAI guy, like how do you address that question when people ask you, if they do?
Yeah, I think on the API side, it is where I spend most of my time. So on the API side, we don't use any of that data to train the models. Historically, we did. That changed on March 1st. So now all of our API customers, if you're using the playground, you're using chat completions or the assistance API or any of those APIs, we don't use that data. So I think that gives enterprises the flexibility to go and build and not have to worry about this trade-off. I think inside of ChatGPT, there's a different set of privacy controls and things like that. You do have the ability to turn off the training on your data. If you're a ChatGPT customer, you can go into your settings and turn it off. You also, if you're a ChatGPT enterprise customer, by default, it's turned off. I think we'll continue to give people more control and flexibility. I think this is in a lot of ways what consumers want. I think as somebody who worked at Apple for a while, like privacy and making sure you have control of your data is like something that I feel really deeply strong about, which is why I'm super happy that we have the stance we do on the API side. I also think like there's a bunch of stuff that we do from the data that is collected to make sure that it's, people's personal information isn't being exposed in the training data. There's a bunch of PII stuff that takes place to get rid of all that information. And again, going back to the comment about enterprises, like enterprises, if you're a large organization, you can go and get ChatGPT Enterprise. You can also choose to just use the API and build something yourself. I think the barrier to doing that has never been lower. Now with the Assistance API, you can go and build a version of ChatGPT built on the API that you don't have to worry about that problem. So you have a whole slew of options today, and I think again over time, like you're just going to end up with a lot more choice and customization. But it's an understandable situation for companies to be in, and I think it's sad in some way because like there's so much value that can be had. Like my partner works at a company where they don't have access to ChatGPT, and it's just like interesting to think about like the downside for those employees who are not only not getting the productivity boost in their own job, but also thinking about like not getting exposed to AI technology because it's like kind of hard. Like if I'm like, what am I going to just like have ChatGPT like write me poems and like birthday songs or something like that for it's like really the core part of the core value proposition is using ChatGPT for like actual meaningful work. And if you take that away, I think there's a lot of people who like aren't going to, get the opportunity to be super adjusted to this technology. And I think that's a downside for both the employer and the employee. And I'm hopeful that like, as this technology continues to ramp up, that will change for a lot of companies.
Yeah, and I think we're really seeing that trend in the industry, as you announced at the conference, and a massive chunk of the Fortune 500 companies are using OpenAI and ChatGPT. I think this is a trend that obviously will, there might have been some walls put up at the beginning, but this is just getting rolled out everywhere. Logan, thank you. I know we're running out of time, but I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing your insights. This has been absolutely phenomenal. If people and listeners want to get in contact with you or learn more about, what you're working on and seeing, where is a good place for them to follow you or find you?
Probably Twitter and LinkedIn are where I'm most active these days.
Okay, awesome. And to the listener, we'll drop a link in the show notes to his social so you can find him and follow him there and, hear everything that he's up to and the latest and greatest. Again, thanks so much for coming on. To the listener, thanks so much for tuning in to the AI Applied podcast. Make sure to rate us wherever you get your podcasts and have a wonderful rest of your day.